This isn't just a story, it's a cry from the soul of nature. She was bleeding into the dirt, the color of her lifeblood blending with the roots of the forest like a silent prayer. Nearby, two tiny cries cracked through the stillness, fragile, lost and barely clinging to life. The sky was a hard blue over the Montana backcountry when Mark stepped into the edge of the woods. Not as a hero, not as a man searching for anything more than a few sturdy branches to fix a fence. But fate had a different blueprint for his day. The ground was crisp with pine needles, and sunlight fractured through the trees like shattered glass. It was the kind of afternoon that held its breath. Then came a sound, low, broken, a wet rasp threading its way through the stillness. Not the wind, not the familiar stir of deer or the sharp warning of a raven. This was different. Something was calling out in pain, and it carried the weight of finality. Mark's feet slowed, boots crunching softly now, each step an answer to that trembling voice. He didn't know why he followed the sound, only that something in it refused to be ignored. 20 paces in, the forest opened just enough for truth to reveal itself. At the base of a slope, twisted and broken like a fallen warrior, lay a mother. Bobcat. Her fur was crusted in blood, her eyes distant as if they were already staring through the veil. Her chest fluttered once barely. Dried blood stitched her side, while fresh gashes cut across her ribs. One back leg jutted at a wrong angle, and her jaw moved in a silent gasp. Mark felt the breath leave his own lungs. But that wasn't the sound he had heard. It came again, soft, high, and heartbreakingly helpless from behind her body. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten by God. His hand brushed against a moss-slicked log, and as he bent down, time stilled. From beneath the decay, 2 tiny bobcat kittens blinked toward him, blinking not in fear, but in confusion. No bigger than a man's palm, their fur was patchy, their ears not yet risen. One tried to crawl, his body trembling like a leaf against a gust. The other just tilted his head toward the motionless form of their mother. They hadn't learned what death was, but they would soon. Mark knelt slowly, reverently, as though kneeling before a holy altar. The smaller kitten squeaked a dry, cracked note that stabbed through the air like a broken violin string. And then it happened, the mother bobcat's chest stilled forever. She had waited for him. She had endured just long enough to protect her children until mercy found them in the shape of a stranger. Mark unfolded his flannel jacket like it was a sacred offering and laid it gently beside the kittens. When he reached out, they didn't resist. There was no flinching, no flight, just the instinctual draw toward warmth, toward life. They curled into the flannel with trembling bodies and hollow bellies. And as Mark stood, cradling them to his chest, the forest fell into silence again, except this time, it felt like something sacred had just passed. 2 orphaned bobcats, a lifeless mother, and a man who had simply gone to fix a fence. But destiny speaks in strange voices, and on that day, it had chosen him. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. The kitchen was warm, the kind of warmth that held generations in its walls. Mark laid the bundle on the counter, and Ellen, his wife, his anchor froze. Her eyes widened at the sight of the tiny, lifeless-looking bundles curled in flannel. "Mark, what is that?" she asked, though her heart already knew. He didn't speak right away, just unwrapped the fabric like a priest unveiling a sacred relic. The kittens barely moved. One twitched an ear. The other squeaked, as if summoning hope from the bottom of a dry well. "They're bobcats," he finally said, voice low, eyes locked on the frail things before them. She didn't make it, but they were still crying. I couldn't. Ellen stepped closer. She had seen heartache in many forms. Orphaned raccoons after a storm, feral kittens left to freeze. Opossums tossed like trash on dirt roads. They lived deep in Montana's hills, where stray animals found them like prayers found old churches. But this was something different. "They're too young," she whispered. "They won't make it without around-the-clock care." Mark didn't flinch. "We can try." No grand speeches, just truth. She nodded once, and the house transformed. She moved with a kind of stillness inside motion, the calm of someone who had grieved deeply and yet never stopped offering kindness. Towels warmed, goat's milk simmered. A shoebox lined with soft flannel appeared like a crib carved from grace. One of the kittens couldn't lift his head. The other latched weakly. When milk touched his lips, Ellen didn't force the weaker one. Instead, she wrapped him close to her chest in warm cloth and rocked him like a child forgotten by the world. Even the sparrow has found a home, and the swallow a nest for herself where she may have her young. The house, once quiet in its simplicity, became a sanctuary of survival. Every 2 hours they took turns checking breath, warming milk. Whispering words meant more for their own hope than the kitten's ears. Around 3 a.m., Mark stood at the edge of the box, watching the smaller one's chest rise too slow. "They're wild," he whispered. "They're not supposed to be here." Ellen didn't look up. "They're babies," she said. "And they're here now." In the corner, their old orange barn cat snored softly, unaware that under the same roof, 2 new lives clung desperately to this world. By morning, the air outside hung thick with frost and fog. Inside, it was the smell of milk, wool, and fragile miracles. Beneath a soft lamp, 2 spotted kittens stirred their warmth, stolen back from the edge of death. Ellen hadn't slept. Her eyes were red, her hand still resting gently on the smallest one's chest. "I think the big one is stabilizing," she whispered. Mark knelt beside her. The little one's still fighting. They sat like that, in silence that needed no filling, just the sound of shallow breaths and stubborn will dot. And then came the softest of sounds, paws, padding across wooden floorboards. Willow, the sleek gray cat, entered the room, followed by Maple, the round-bellied orange mother. Both had recently nursed their own litters. Both carried an energy only mothers know. Ellen lifted the kittens into the flannel wrap again and whispered, "Let's see what they think. A time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance." The rest of the story hadn't been written yet. But in that moment, the home had already changed. 2 wild souls had been pulled from the silence of death into the rhythm of human hands, into the warm breath of second chances. This wasn't just animal rescue. This was resurrection. And it had only just begun. An animal's calling, will you answer? The sunroom, bathed in the golden hush of late afternoon light, had long been a place of peace. It was where the cats rested during the day. Willow curled into old quilts, Maple nestled in a straw basket like royalty draped in wool. But that day the room became something more, a threshold between 2 worlds. Ellen walked in holding the wrapped bundle close to her chest, every step deliberate, as if she were carrying something holy. She knelt and gently placed the flannel beside Willow's corner, its edges brushing the familiar wool that smelled of sun and feline sleep. Mark stood silently in the doorway, hands braced on either side of the frame, not daring to take another step. The air held its breath. In that moment, nature stood still, not in fear, but in recognition. Willow paused mid-step, her gray body taut with curiosity. Her ears flicked, her pupils widened. Maple, the orange matriarch, hissed just once, a small note of resistance that dissolved as quickly as it came. Neither cat retreated. Instead, they approached slowly, tails down, posture low. Caution met courage as they sniffed the bundle, circling like ancient guardians, assessing something sacred. The bobcat kittens didn't move, but something passed between them, unseen. A shift, a stirring. The larger kitten chirped, faint but clear. The smaller one, barely able to lift its head, turned toward the scent of the cats as though drawn by. A memory it never had. Willow's muscles softened. She crouched low, her eyes never leaving the bundle. Then, without a sound, she lay beside it, better as a neighbor nearby than a brother far away. The bobcat's paw reached forward, blindly, its tiny mouth parting in instinct. It pressed into Willow's fur, not nursing, not yet, but with purpose, with trust. She didn't flinch. She didn't turn away, she just stayed. Maple watched, head tilted, the tension in her shoulders slowly dissolving. The silence of the room was reverent, like a chapel echoing with unspoken prayers. Ellen didn't move. Mark barely breathed. What they were witnessing wasn't just animal behavior, it was a miracle of interspecies grace. Predator met predator. But something older and deeper than instinct spoke louder. The beginning of a bond had bloomed, quiet and profound. And in that fleeting moment, the long shadow of death was lifted by the gentlest kind of hope. By the second night, there was no more hesitation. The Bobcat kittens were nestled in the same flannel-lined box, side by side with Willow and Maples. Own young. The larger Bobcat, still shaky, latched on for the first time awkwardly, cautiously, then with increasing rhythm. Willow lay on her side, curved protectively around them, her own kitten tucked beneath her paw. Her eyes blinked once, then closed as she rested her chin gently over both the wild and the domestic. Maple stayed nearby, often curling into the same nest. She didn't have much milk left, but she licked the Bobcat's ears clean, warmed their paws, and guarded their sleep like a silent sentinel. Love one another deeply, from the heart. Mark stood in the doorway that evening, camera trembling in his hands. The light filtered through old glass panes, soft and warm across the flannel nest. Ellen whispered, "Don't spook them." But Mark already knew he was standing on sacred ground. They uploaded just 30 seconds of footage, no music, no edits. Just the raw, holy sight of a ginger house cat gently cleaning the crusted face of a sleeping bobcat kitten while others houseborn and wildborn slept beside them. A pile of innocence and unity. The response stunned them. Within 12 hours, the video had 1 million views. By morning, 3 major accounts had reposted it. Comments rolled in like a wave. "I'm sobbing. This healed something I didn't know was broken. If a cat can love a bobcat, why can't we love each other?" Wildlife centers began reaching out. Teachers asked permission to show the clip in classrooms. News anchors sent emails. But inside that quiet Montana cabin, the only thing that mattered hadn't changed. 2 once orphaned bobcat kittens were now warm, fed, and held in a world that had chosen not to give up on them. They didn't know they were different. They only knew they weren't alone, and as Ellen watched Willow stretch a protective paw across the smallest one's belly, she whispered to no one in particular, "They don't need to match. They just need to matter. Let everything that has breath praise the Lord." By the end of the second week, the change was undeniable. The bobcat kittens were growing, not rapidly, but with the strength of steady love. Their ears had fully unfurled. Their pale blue eyes now tracked motion. With alert curiosity, they moved with more control, their limbs no longer trembling. And then, a moment that startled joy into the room, the larger bobcat leapt. It wasn't elegant. It was more of a clumsy hop and tumble, but it made contact with a yarn ball and froze in shock. Then came the second pounce, the bat of a paw, a flick of tail. It had begun. The house was no longer big enough for what followed. The bobcats and house kittens erupted with playful chaos. They were under the kitchen table, tangled in bootlaces, climbing curtains, sliding across floors. Mark stepped carefully. Now, Ellen moved like a nurse in a nursery of mayhem. Each towel, each chair, each corner held a sleeping or leaping soul. It was wild. It was loud. It was perfect. Eventually they moved the growing family to the barn, not the dusty, forgotten half, but the warm, finished section Ellen once used to raise orphaned lambs. Mark converted it into a sanctuary. Heat lamps, old rugs, sealed walls, and straw-filled crates became the new kingdom. Ellen created a den with wool blankets, cut-up flannel, and a hay-lined crate. They called it the Kit Room. But in private moments, they both called it something else, the den. Because that's where it happened. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. The kittens climbed. The larger bobcat used its claws to scale the lowest loft rung, raw determination in every movement. The smaller one followed slower, but determined. At night, the flannel-lined crate became their nest. House kittens and bobcats melted into one unbroken pile. Sometimes they nursed. Other times they simply slept, indistinguishable in the warmth. Willow and Maple were ever watchful, correcting bites with gentle taps, teaching manners through tender nudges. There were no lines anymore. Just a family chosen, not born. Mark leaned on the barn door often, watching. Ellen would kneel in straw, a kitten on each thigh, whispering lullabies too old to remember. There was peace in that space. No internet. No press, no theories of survival. Just a fierce, unwavering will to care. And in one quiet corner, two bobcats who had once tasted death played like they'd always belonged, but then came the silence. The smaller bobcat stopped playing. No chirps. No sparkle in his eyes. At first, Ellen thought he was tired, but by evening he refused the bottle. His breathing shortened, his head lay still against the flannel. His belly was too warm, his paws too cold. Ellen's heart froze. "Mark," she whispered, voice trembling. "I think we're losing him." Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. She didn't leave his side. She wrapped him in towels, tucked him to her chest under her coat. Her warmth was now his only hope. She rocked gently, whispering old songs, words wrapped in love and desperation. She dimmed the lights, placed a heating pad beneath him. Then she called softly into the dark, "Willow." The barn cat came. No hesitation. She padded through straw and shadow, curled against Ellen. Maple followed, pressing in from the other side. The kitten, barely breathing, was now surrounded not by medicine but by presence. That night passed in stillness. Ellen drifted in and out of sleep, each time waking with her hand on his chest. Still rising. Still falling. Still here. By sunrise, he lifted his head. She didn't exhale, just stared, awed and terrified. A fingertip offered milk, a lick, another, a paw twitched. He tried to stand, stumbled, tried again. 3 steps, then he stopped. He turned not to Ellen, not to the heat, but to Willow. Slowly, clumsily, he crossed the barn, dragging himself until his face pressed into her side. No plea, no confusion, a choice. He nudged her softly and collapsed. Willow didn't blink. She licked his head once, then pulled him into her arms. By the 6th week, it was clear they weren't just surviving. They were home. He sets the lonely in families. The bobcat kittens no longer needed bottles. Their coats thickened. Golden and spotted, their muscles moved like poetry. They leapt with grace, and still they stayed close. Mark and Ellen stood by the barn fence at dusk, voices low, faces turned toward the glowing den. Could they be released? Could they survive in the wild they'd never truly known? But the bobcats had already made their choice. They hadn't just learned how to survive. They'd learned how to belong. It didn't happen with words or declarations or decisions carved into wood. There was no line they crossed, no ceremony held beneath the Montana sky. It was quiet like most true things. Mark was bent at the waist, brushing sawdust off the feed crates when the larger bobcat padded over, tail flicking once, eyes locked on him, not with hunger or confusion, but something steadier. Then, without hesitation, the lynx leapt into the wheelbarrow, landing with the soft thud of muscle and fur on steel, and stood there, perfectly still, like he was presenting himself. His tufted ears twitched once toward the light, then toward Mark. It wasn't a trick, it was a choice. Mark looked toward the barn door where Ellen was watching, arms full of feed buckets and fleece. Their eyes met. He didn't smile. "Not yet." He just said, quiet as breath, "I guess they're ours." Ellen didn't move right away. She looked toward the kitten in the wheelbarrow, then toward the smaller one curled like smoke in the hay beside a lamb. "We were theirs the day they made it," she whispered, "and from that day on the forest no longer held claim to them. They roamed the property like they'd been born to it, like their paws had memorized each crack in the porch steps before they even opened their eyes. They chased leaves blown from the cottonwoods, somersaulted through the chicken run like shadows, stitched to the wind. They perched on fence posts as if they were mountain kings surveying a kingdom made of alfalfa and cedar. And yet every evening, just as the last threads of sunlight slipped below the western treetops, they returned. No call, no command. They came back to the barn, not because they were trained, not because they were kept, because something in them had rooted. They slept in the old crates still lined with flannel, though they barely fit now. Often they curled beside Maple, who tolerated their larger size with regal resignation, or against Willow, who still groomed the ruff behind their ears. Even as they towered over her, Mark mounted a trail cam one afternoon just above the loft window. Ellen uploaded short clips, no editing, no music, just the breath of the barn and the weight of wonder. One clip, barely 26 seconds long, showed the smaller Bobcat lean golden, eyes wide leaping into Ellen's lap while she bottle-fed a lamb. Her laugh was soft, off-camera, and she whispered, "You again?" It hit 4 million views in 2 days. People weren't just watching, they were witnessing. Donations trickled in. A local vet clinic offered free annual checkups for life. One morning, a hand-carved sign arrived in the mail with no return address. Burned into the wood in precise lettering, "The Bobcat's barn underneath." In smaller script, "Not all who are wild are meant to leave." But none of that mattered. Not to Mark and Ellen. What mattered was the pause. That split second every time when one of the lynx would spot them across the yard and freeze. Not in fear, not hesitation, but recognition. A moment before the run, before the leap into arms or the brush against a boot. The kind of look a child gives when they know who loves them. One dusk, Ellen sat outside the barn, hay-sweet wind curling around her knees. The smaller lynx was curled in her lap, body heavier now, but still somehow weightless in trust. He wasn't asleep, his breath was too aware, but his eyes had that look, half-closed like a hymn. Her hand moved gently between his ears, slow and rhythmic like a tide coming home. Mark leaned in the barn doorway, arms folded, shoulders slack with a kind of holy fatigue. They'd been here before. Not this exact posture, but this ache, this fullness. This almost too muchness, the silence of it, they had built this life after. The hardest part of their love had unraveled. After the long years of hoping and not having. After the nursery that never held a crib. After the last failed test. After the last whispered, "I can't do this to us anymore." They stopped speaking. Protective custodianship granted. The lynx were now officially non-releasable, non-dangerous, and entirely beautifully home. Their den, that hay-stuffed barn. Their kingdom, the soft, green pastures. Their family, 2 aging barn cats who once nursed them, and 2 humans who once chose love over logic. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the rose. Spring came as if the land itself had been holding its breath all winter. The orchard burst into blossom. The creek, once frozen, sang again. And in the corner of the barn, beneath a sagging beam and a soft nest of straw, one of the barn cats gave birth again 4 tiny kittens, blind and squeaking, looking for warmth. And just like years before, the Bobcats watched. Not with hunger, not with detachment, with reverence. Like witnessing a memory reborn. Ellen sat for hours in the shadows, notebook in hand, recording each moment. She didn't expect what came. Next, one evening, she stepped out to close the chicken coop and spotted the younger lynx slightly smaller, with one nicked ear grooming the smallest kitten. Gently, carefully, as if remembering what it meant to be held. The kitten squeaked, batted his little paw at the lynx's face. Ellen laughed, covered her mouth, her eyes filled. "You're doing it again," she whispered, barely audible over the soft night breeze. At dinner, Mark glanced out the window. "And froze, Ellen," he murmured, motioning. There they were, both lynx, stretched lazily on the grass like lions, and the 3 barn kittens clambering across their backs like miniature explorers. The sun caught their fur just right. For a moment, you couldn't tell where wild ended and domestic began. Ellen leaned into him, her voice tender. "You think they even know they're different?" Mark smiled, slow and soft. "No, said, and that's why it works. There was no cage, no collar, no rules carved in stone. Just a field, a barn, two old barn cats, and two bobcats who had once crawled out of the forest cold, hungry, and invisible, and who now slept beneath the same roof as those who first taught them what love felt like. Not wild, not tame, home. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Every story shared on Hope and Fur isn't just a tale, it's a reminder. A cry, a truth whispered by the forgotten, and echoed by the kind. These bobcats should not have survived. Not without their mother, not through those first bitten nights. Not with instincts screaming they didn't belong, but they did. Because two people said yes, and two old cats opened their space. This wasn't just rescue. It was revolution, a soft, quiet revolution of the heart. A choice made again and again. To stay up all night bottle feeding what might never purr, to sit on a barn floor for hours just to let a wild animal inch closer, to believe that tenderness doesn't end at the edge of a species, that compassion doesn't need translation. The world said, they're too wild. The farmhouse whispered back, they're ours. The world drew lines. The barn erased them. And in a time when everything feels divided, people, borders, hearts, a single moment, just a kitten curled beside a lynx, reminded us what it looks like to accept without condition, to love without limits, to belong. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. This journey from cold forest floor to warm farmhouse den is more than emotional, it's essential. Nonprofit animal rescue, wildlife rehabilitation, and sanctuary advocacy aren't just about saving animals. They're about saving ourselves, our humanity, our capacity to soften, to choose mercy when fear is easier. When you share stories like this, when you feel them, you're doing more than watching. You're part of the healing. You're making sure the next orphaned bobcat finds warmth, the next injured hawk gets flight. The next trembling creature under a rotting log is seen, not stepped over. So if this story touched you, let it ripple. Let it echo. Let it sit inside someone else's heart, the way these lynx found home in a barn not made for them, but made better because of them. Join us at Jungle Diaries, where every heartbeat becomes a story, and every story becomes hope.